Hi, good evening. Tonight, the League of Women Voters, ABC, Anoka, Blaine Coon Rapids area, wishes to honor our friend Connie Moore, who's Executive Director of Alexandra House, with our Friend of League Award 2024. Connie has not yet seen this award, so we are very privileged to have watercolor artists, two of them in our midst. And tonight, Connie's award is a picture taken from Bunker Hills Park, where she hosts many fundraisers. It's a very beautiful place of respite, which is important in this line of work. And the award reads, ABC League of Women Voters 2024, Friend of League, Connie Moore, Executive Director of Alexandra House, for offering women a path to a brighter future. And it's signed by our President, Gretchen Sable. And I just had a few things written up because that's the way I am. In January, Connie educated our members and the community about the work of Alexandra House in helping victims of domestic violence and the struggles to obtain funds to continue this work. We are encouraged by the stories that were shared by former victims. Many now enjoy a path to a better future because of the support they found from Alexandra House. The artwork of our member, Cynthia DeRuyter, features Bunker Hills Regional Park, the location of many fundraisers for Alexandra House. We hope this watercolor can be an encouraging symbol for Connie of the path and tranquility found by many of those served by programs you have overseen. Connie, you've committed your life to this difficult but rewarding work. We want to recognize you and honor you for what you do to improve life in our community. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you.
You're so welcome.
And to let you know that in March, the end of March 29th is our Hope Gala, and it will be at the courtyards of Andover. Oh. So just putting that little bug in your ear, it's our annual largest fundraiser. So, but thank you so much.
We're very, very happy for what you've done to give people a brighter path. We want to keep it positive. Yeah. And we have two people that have worked with your work, and I am going to allow each of them to comment because I know you all work together in many ways. Do you have anything you want to say about Alexandra House, either of you?
I'm Brad Wise.
I took your microphone.
Good point. My name is Brad Wise. I'm the current Anoka County Sheriff. I've known Connie Moore for a long time. 30 years in law enforcement for me in our county, first for Coon Rapids and now with the Anoka County Sheriff's Office, but I can speak firsthand and know the importance of the work that Connie is, the service she's providing for victims of domestic and sexual violence. Of course, the hard part about doing a job like that is you never really know the impact because we talk about things we're trying to prevent, and when something doesn't happen, it's hard to demonstrate that. That said, we survive off the anecdotes, the victories with the individual victims. It's what fuels the work, and I know she's been a passionate advocate. I'm going to talk a lot about this later, but a passionate advocate for victims, and congratulations to you. It's well-deserved. Many more, too, so thank you, Connie.
Connie, congratulations on this recognition. I've got some remarks that I'll save for the end when I'm kind of when I'm done talking about domestic violence and what our office does and a little bit of that. But I just wanted to say that we could have done this at any point in time in the last 10 or 15 years, Connie. I mean, you have created such a vision for all of us with Alexandra House that I can't, and I'll talk about this again and repeat myself a little bit, but I can't even imagine an Anoka County without Alexandra House as a pivotal part of our criminal justice system here, so, and helping keep people safe. So thank you.
Thank you. Hello and welcome. Tonight we have a program called Fighting Domestic Violence. I'm Julie Trude, the Vice President of the ABC League of Women Voters. We've asked Anoka County Attorney Brad Johnson and Anoka County Sheriff Brad Wise to be with us tonight to talk about how Anoka County handles domestic violence cases. You just saw us give an award to the Executive Director, Connie Moore, of the Alexandra House, who provides shelter and services to those who are victims of domestic abuse and leads them on to a brighter future. And now we need to know, how does our county handle the cases that come to them? I know both these gentlemen have actively fought to improve funding and to improve the outcomes, because this year we learned about the situation in Anoka County from Connie Moore in January. We did a program called What is Alexandra House? You can find that on YouTube, on the QCTV channel, or on the LWV ABC channel, if you'd like to learn more. After that program, when we heard there was a funding shortfall, our league contacted local law enforcement, found good support, and many legislators good support in advocating for improved state funding. Sheriff Wise immediately became involved and wrote a letter. Police Chief Brian Padani of Blaine wrote a letter. Many of our area legislators wrote letters. And then I know County Attorney Brad Johnson's a member of an organization of county attorneys, and they provided testimony. All the advocacy of our members, of those that we have worked with and partnered with, did result in almost $10 million more in funding for victims of crimes, some of which went to domestic shelters. But there's still a significant shortfall because there was a 40% federal funding cut in a program that comes from fees collected from convicted criminals in federal court systems. The federal government has failed to allocate appropriate funding from that. And so the shortfalls continue, and many programs in other states are on the edge of failure. There's a lot of concern. We've seen some really terrible things in the news in the past year. Many of us live in neighborhoods where we've seen police cars come and go, or we've heard stories or know people. And so we wanted to delve into this a little more and learn what is happening locally when someone calls 911, and what happens to the victims, what happens to those that are the abusers. We don't know as much as we'd like to know. We think there's a big problem in our community. We'd like to learn more. We wish there was some easy solutions. It doesn't seem like there are. But so tonight we're going to hear from these two gentlemen, the highest elected law enforcement officials in our county, who deal directly with these issues in their daily lives. So first, we're going to speak with, have the sheriff speak, and I'd like to share a little bit about him. Sheriff Brad Wise has a long career in police and law enforcement, and he was elected sheriff quite recently in 2022, as was County Attorney Brad Johnson. And just a little side note is you won the sweeps of the of the ABC League of Women Voters candidate forum views. Amongst all of the candidate forums that we've ever held, the county sheriff and county attorney candidate forums had 7,050 views. So
Must
there
be
was,
because of your good look.
well, there was intense interest in the races each of you ran, because they were open seats for the first time in a long time, and there were a lot of interest. There was very competitive races. You both fought very hard, and a lot of interest. And so I thought you'd enjoy that little side note. So continuing, Sheriff Weiss has been in law enforcement 27 years, in Coon Rapids 11 as the police chief. During his tenure as chief, I actually met him a number of times through Anoka County Joint Law Enforcement Council when I was Andover's mayor. This group of police chiefs, county officials, and mayors meet together, and one of the major projects was this implementing a new IT system, and I imagine it's still a headache, but it was a big project that we funded as taxpayers amongst our cities and counties, and he took the leadership of chairing the budget and implementation. And this complex project was designed to help coordinate the flow of information between police and deputies, fire departments, county attorney's office, EMTs, and on, all to kind of streamline all the records they maintain and keep to create a quicker process for prosecuting to try and eliminate duplication. So it's a meaningful project, but we all know how much fun major IT projects are. And so I was very impressed with his leadership on that, his tenacity, and I'm sure those have been really helpful in his job now. And another path that we crossed was when I implemented the Heart Safe Community Program here in Andover. Sheriff Weiss was then police chief of Coon Rapids, and he offered support to meet the program goals because his vision for a community was a very broad vision, and we both share that vision. So now tonight, he's going to help us understand the sheriff's office and how they handle domestic abuse. And after that, we'll have County Attorney Brad Johnson further enlighten us on how his office handles domestic abuse issues and cases. So I'm very privileged to introduce both of these officers in our midst to hear more tonight, and I welcome interaction amongst them as well. And I will have a hard time not interacting as well, because that's how these things can become a little more entertaining for everybody. So please go ahead.
I introduced myself earlier, so I'm Brad. And I'm fortunate in that I get to work with a county attorney who I know really well. Brad Johnson was a city council member for the city of Coon Rapids for a long time, and as a police chief there, a police person, obviously had a very close relationship with the council. So frankly, it works out great. I think it's phenomenal for Anoka County that I have a close relationship with the county attorney, because it does make a difference over the long run.
I kind of wondered about this because I knew you'd work together. And
It's a good thing.
I kind of wondered if you went to high school together or not. But
Oh, we were in neighboring cities, so I was in
okay.
Anoka.
He was the
and
mortal
Coon
enemy.
Rapids.
Yeah,
Right.
he was the
Okay,
enemy,
okay,
you know,
all
the
right.
guy. So,
Right.
and I was a Coon Rapids guy, so yeah, back in those days for sure.
Okay.
And plus, he's a little younger than I am, if I'm being honest. So.
It's hard to know.
Yeah, yeah. But to circle back to domestic violence and because actually I do want to talk maybe just a little bit, not a ton of detail, but at least give you a 30,000-foot look at how it's changed over my career. So I first started in Coon Rapids in 1995 in law enforcement. And by the time I started in law enforcement, the laws themselves had morphed to you must arrest when there was a 911 call for service, when the officer showed up, when I showed up as a patrol officer. The way the statutes were written is that if there's probable cause to believe that violence took place, the police officer made the arrest. And that was kind of a newer thing. The idea was to remove the decision-making from the victim, from basically the intimate partner victim, which all seemed well and good, but it wasn't enough. And realistically, somewhere along the way, I don't know if I'm inelegant, but like disempowered victims in some way. What we recognize is that we were taking some of the control away from the victim, which really wasn't supporting the victim in the way they needed to be supported. So here we were well-intentioned making those arrests, separating the two of them, and Patrol Officer Brad Wise drove victims then to the Alexandra House for them to have a safe place to be. But we weren't, at least on the law enforcement end, good about addressing but what about tomorrow? We weren't very good about that. And that's been the piece that we've been working on ever since then. And again, I don't want to spend 15 minutes talking about that yet. I'll just say that now we've morphed at least into being smarter about taking a minute and trying to figure out what the victim needs in order to make that long-term change. Because yes, removing the threat immediately is good. It's great, it's essential. But what we do with that time window when there's a forced separation between the victim and the offender, we got to make good use of that time, because we're trying to prevent a recurrence. And like I said earlier, Connie's work is so difficult because while you can see anecdotes of success, you just really don't know the impact of, because you're trying to measure what didn't happen. It's proving a negative, so to speak. But I guess I'll leave that for right now. So we still do the mandatory arrests. We still respond to 911 calls. We like to think we're better at doing what we call lethality assessment to try to figure out when a victim is in danger, like immediate danger, and I think we're much better at that. And then it's trying to use the resources through Alex's House, at least where we can be the beginning of trying to figure out a longer term plan to try to make sure that this violent event doesn't happen again, that it never happens again for any individual victim. So I don't know, I'll leave my comments at that. Brad?
Good evening, everybody. I'm
Well,
Brad.
let me do a little intro to you too,
Oh.
if I could. Oh, unless you want to.
Fair enough.
It's short,
good
it's
bio.
short, but yeah, it's
Can you
pleasant.
embarrass me?
I do have one thing,
okay,
maybe.
okay.
Okay. So County Attorney Brad Johnson was first elected in 2022 to his office after a long career as a prosecutor, child protection lawyer, and trial lawyer. He chairs the Anoka County Joint Law Enforcement Council, and I understand you're the treasurer now, so you're still doing the budgets.
Yeah.
And before that, you served also as an elected official, as I have, but you were on the Coon Rapids City Council. So I knew that you two knew each other. I didn't know quite how well, and I presumed. You come from a very long line of public servants. Your grandfather and your father both served. And you have been a very active supporter also of the Heart Safe Community Program with fundraising. Do you skate with the cops, or you support that program?
I am a horrible skater. I love hockey, so I go watch their games. But Heart Safe is something that we actually brought into our office. All the employees of the Anoka County Attorney's Office are trained through the Heart Safe program on how to use AEDs.
And I bet Officer
Platts.
Platts,
Brian Platts.
yeah, Brian Platts was part of that. Thank
Yep.
you. I'm glad to hear that. I appreciate that. And I see Target now has AEDs, and he's pushed for that a long time. So, and I just wanted to say, I know you're a little bit of a behind-the-scenes type of person, because I understand once in a while a turkey dinner might show up at the Coon Rapids Police Department because you feel bad for the guys working holiday.
Yeah, I think for close to 10 years now, my wife Daisy and I have done and the kids have done a turkey for the law enforcement in Coon Rapids that have been working that night.
Yeah, so that's not embarrassing, that's just a nice guy thing that people didn't know, so now. All right, so now please go ahead and tell us about how the county attorney's office deals with the issues of
Sure,
domestic
and
violence.
thank you, everybody, and good evening and happy Veterans Day to you all who are veterans and also to the family members of veterans. I'm Brad Johnson, the county attorney here in Anoka County. It's my great privilege to serve really an amazing community that is very diverse, but also very committed to being a great place to live, work, eat, sleep, and play, and it's just a wonderful community. So I thought I'd break this down into a little bit of the problem, the history here in Anoka County, a little bit of our office, and I might have a word or two to say about Connie. Two numbers, 20 and 10 million. 20 and 10 million. Does anybody here know what those two numbers represent? I didn't think so. It'd be hard to correlate them if I were asked just randomly, but 20 million people per minute in the United States are physically abused by an intimate partner. Per minute, 20 people per minute. That's one every 3 seconds. So while I've been talking up here, multiple people have been victims of domestic violence in the United States. That equates to 10 million a year. That is only the intimate partner domestic violence, okay? The numbers grow much greater if you include child abuse, the abuse of others in a household or family, and that number doesn't even include threats or intimidation or stalking or violations of harassment restraining orders that are nonviolent. Well, it is predominantly women. Men can also be victims of domestic violence, and so domestic violence is a huge challenge, not just for Anoka County, not just for Minnesota, not just for our nation, but candidly worldwide. It is a human problem. Turning now to the history here in Anoka County, if you go back less than 50 years, so less than our lifetimes, the only resources available in our community to address this problem were the family unit. People turned to family out of desperation to try to keep them safe, and that's hard. That's really hard. Sometimes our churches got involved, and sometimes an incident required law enforcement and prosecutors to address the problem in our criminal justice system. Go back 50 years, that's it. That's all that existed. In 1976, 1977, a discussion began in Anoka County that changed the way that we deal with things today. People who had identified this ongoing and perpetual problem said, we can do better. And Anoka County created a task force for battered women. Local leaders from Blaine and Fridley and Spring Lake Park and Columbia Heights came together, volunteers came together, thought leaders from St. Timothy's Catholic Church, and that led to the creation of one of the state's first crisis lines, 24-hour crisis lines, so that there was a place and a number for people to call if they were in crisis that related to domestic violence. And from that came the inspiration for a safe place for women to go with their families. And by 1980, the foundation of Alexandra House was set. Does anybody here know why Alexandra House is called Alexandra House? Okay, Connie, can you tell them? Can you tell them?
Well, there's two reasons. One,
We'd have to have her go over to the speaker podium, which she's comfortable
I
doing.
want Connie to tell people. I can tell
Yeah,
them,
it'd
but I
be
want
better
Connie to
coming
tell
from
people.
her.
Right.
Yeah, just go to the podium. Yeah, we'd like to hear yours.
okay, so there's two reasons. Named after Alexandra the saint, and then one of the founders of Alexandra House, her first name was Alexandra.
Right.
So it kind of all worked out. So they decided that they were going to call the shelter Alexandra House.
And Alexandra is the patron saint
Yes.
and defender of womankind, right? So that's what so it's a great name.
Yeah.
Anoka County has been, in my mind, a leader in getting communities and diverse communities to come together to solve and tackle difficult and hard problems. I have a saying that goes something like, we all do better when we all work together, and that is certainly true here. There is no better example than Alexandra House, which became a focal point for law enforcement and prosecutors, county social services, courts, and policymakers at the city, county, and state levels here in Anoka County. Today, some of us shorthanded, Alex House. Today, Alex House works with every law enforcement agency in Anoka County and beyond, with every city and county prosecutor who handles domestic violence, and with an amazing, staggering number of victims of domestic violence and their families, and we can never forget, including children and now pets. Because one of the barriers for people leaving a place to go to a safe place is they worry about their cat or their dog. And so Alexandra House recognized that problem and is doing something about it by creating an additional part of their shelter, a safe harbor for those dear pets and family members. Today, Alexandra House is more than a family shelter. They provide legal advocacy. They provide support services for victims and families. They provide violence prevention programs, elder abuse services, community education, professional training, and I believe they still provide an on-call hospital advocate too, as well. So imagine severe domestic violence, especially the kind that ends up in my office, often comes to light in a hospital, and that's unfortunate. They fill that gap that law enforcement and prosecutors simply can't fill. County Attorney's Office. Our job in the Anoka County Attorney's Office is to prosecute all felony and juvenile crime in the county. So that's the big stuff, and it's the stuff that relates to juvenile delinquencies. Felony domestic violence includes the following kinds of criminal offenses, and this is not an all-encompassing list. I mean, there are lots of things that felony domestic violence includes, but it includes offenders who have prior domestic violence-related offenses, so people who have a history can rise to the level of felony domestic violence. It includes domestic abuse by strangulation. That's a felony. So people who are choked or whose airway is blocked by having their mouth or their nose covered, that's a felony, and that ends up in our office. It includes serious assaults where there is substantial or great bodily harm. Those are the ones where people end up in the hospital. It includes assaults with firearms or other weapons, which we call second-degree assault here in Minnesota. It includes threats of violence, harassment, and stalking. It includes violating protective orders, domestic abuse, no-contact orders, and interfering with 911 calls. It includes sexual assault. It includes child abuse, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and of course it includes murder and more. And we are currently dealing with all those forms in our office right now. We have lawyers who are designated to handle domestic violence cases. That is their specialty or the area that they have a heavier caseload than some of their colleagues. But all prosecutors in our office are expected to be competent in this area, unfortunately, because it is so prevalent. We do rotate those attorneys because I'm going to tell you, there is a vicarious trauma that impacts all of the criminal justice partners who handle domestic violence cases. We have to be with the victims in court. We have to spend time as we get the cases ready, looking at the photographs, reading and hearing the 911 calls and the testimony. We have to see people who have been brutalized. We sometimes are spending time with autopsy reports and physical evidence that is really difficult to deal with for people. So we rotate them through that. Every domestic violence victim in Anoka County will be assigned a victim witness specialist. Now there's a difference, and I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but there's a difference between a victim witness specialist and a victim advocate, and we'll talk about that briefly. I want to frame this for you, though, about how this goes. If there is probable cause to believe that a felony domestic violence event happened in Anoka County, and there is a good faith belief that we can prove it by the time of trial, our office will charge that case with a criminal complaint. Following the criminal complaint, there will be an arraignment where we will be having a conversation with the court about whether or not the offender should be released before trial. That includes setting conditions, includes setting bail, includes obtaining a domestic abuse no contact order to separate the risk from the offender and the victim from the offender for a period of time. There's a bit of confusion, I think, in Minnesota by the community that thinks we can hold people without bail in Minnesota. In Minnesota, there is a constitutional right to bail. That means that people are entitled to have the court set bail pending a disposition or a sentencing or an outcome in their criminal case. In that analysis, these lethality assessments that Sheriff Wise talked about is very important. What is a lethality assessment? It's basically a questionnaire that law enforcement, and sometimes with the help of Alexandra House, a victim will answer various questions about prior types of domestic violence, about whether or not there are firearms or weapons that have been used or that are in the home, about other factors that can weigh in on the decision-making of prosecutors and judges about how high the bail needs to be to protect public safety, or the types of conditions that need to be set so that we can try to keep people safe while we work the case through the criminal justice system. We will then go through pretrial hearings where the lawyers will argue over rights, where the lawyers will argue over potentially the admissibility of evidence, and where there will be settlement conversations that will happen. We call that plea bargaining. People have heard about that. Then there will be either a trial or a plea in the case. If it results in a conviction, there will be a sentencing, and the judge will order a pre-sentence investigation, where we will try to get to the root of what happened and whether there's a history and how to deal with that, and inform the court and the prosecutor and the defense attorney about whether this is a case that might be appropriate for probation and jail, or whether it might be time to send an offender to prison, which is more likely in felony cases and with the increasing severity of the felony cases than it is for misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor offenses that are often dealt with at the city level. Victims have rights throughout this process, and one of the biggest rights that a victim has is to make a victim impact statement. And it's an important right that we want victims to take advantage of, because we want the court that's sentencing the victim to hear straight from the victim. Some victims are happy to talk to the court directly. Some victims are afraid to talk to the court directly, and our victim witness specialists can assist in that process. Sometimes we have them write down their victim impact statement, and we can read it to them. Sometimes they don't want to make a victim impact statement. And they have a right to restitution and to make a claim for restitution. Sometimes they're injured, have unreimbursed medical bills. Sometimes they have therapy bills. Sometimes there's damage to property that flows from it, and they have a right to restitution. Alexandra House offers advocacy to support victims in this process. Our victim witness specialists are guides. They help walk people through this process so that they can understand what's next, what's coming up, what can they do, what are their victim rights, and how can they invoke their rights before the court. I will tell you, I believe the Anoka County Attorney's Office does it well, but there is always room for improvement, and it's an ever-changing landscape that we deal with. This is where I want to encourage anybody who is listening to all of us up here to support Alexandra House. Remember, Alexandra House, even though it contracts with local governments, it is not part of local government. It is a nonprofit, and it needs our help, our support, and that means it needs to be financially supported, not just by local government, but by everybody in the community. I guess I would say, there but by the grace of God go I. All of us are only 1 degree of separation, if not personally impacted, by people that are victims of domestic violence. They are friends, they are family members. One of my heroes is an assistant Hennepin County attorney who herself was a victim of very serious domestic violence. And she lives in our community in Anoka County. And so we owe it to all of our neighbors to support Alexandra House. Connie, I've known you for...
I'm going to just stop you just a second. One thing you talked about was the city's support, and that's something that I had Connie enlighten me about, because it changes. As we've seen, we have new people elected to office, and we just elected new mayors and council members in our Anoka County communities. And it's become less and less the norm that a city will authorize funds to go towards expenses that are assumed because of crime in their community, which would include domestic violence. Fortunately, no, our larger cities all do.
Yeah.
Our largest cities, Coon Rapids, Blaine, and Andover, all support, but then it dwindles, and then some cities that have no longer. So I would suggest that people inquire of their newly elected officials, do you support funding for victims, not just law enforcement side to put people in jail or arrest people, but do you support the work that needs to be done to help victims, reclaim their lives? And one easy source, and this is the source that's used in my community, is charitable gaming tax funds, and they can be used towards nonprofits. And so it's a non-tax source. But I would just like to make a plug, and you're familiar with these, both of you probably. Yep. And I know as Connie and I were looking at the budget and where money comes from, that's become a smaller portion of their budget. And perhaps it's an area I've thought about, we all know there's a lot of charitable gaming in Anoka County. and those profits from gaming have to go to community causes. Not many of them are making Alexander House a community cause. So that's another thing, when you buy your pull tabs, is ask them, can you make sure some of your proceeds from your profits go to Alexander House? Because sometimes charitable gaming causes abuse.
I think that's a great suggestion, and I would just offer up that if any newly elected council member or town board member is listening to this presentation and they want to find out why should I be supporting Alexander House, I encourage them to pick up the phone and give me a call. Because that's one where we can have a very easy conversation to really quantify for them how it impacts them and how it supports their communities, and it's a worthy cause.
It might be something you could bring up at the Joint Law Enforcement Council, where you see
Sure.
the new mayors and the new city administrators. There's kind of this rotating crop of people coming through our cities all the time.
Yeah, we'll have that opportunity at our next meeting in January. I would just say, with respect to Connie, I mean, I've known Connie for, I'm probably close to as long as Sheriff Wise has, but I will say that Alexander House's impact on this goes way beyond Anoka County. I mean, when I was an assistant Hennepin County attorney, and this is an interesting thing, I'm prosecuting cases and handling domestic violence cases, and I'm trying to get my witness to come, my victim and witness to come to my trial. And I say to my victim witness specialist in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, where are they? We need to find them and get them here for this trial. And they would say they're at Alexander House, because that's the safe place. And so it's not to say that they were a Hennepin County person. A lot of times the crime happens in Hennepin County. They might still be an Anoka County person, or they came from a family in Anoka County, so that's the closest home and safe place.
Or somebody they know tells them.
Or somebody they know tells them.
Because
So
their doors are open to people that show up.
Absolutely, but I mean, the impact has gotten huge. So what I want to say here publicly is, Connie, thank you for your steadfast leadership and capable leadership on domestic violence. Your vision, shared by your staff, which is extremely experienced and valued by our office, has helped to build where we are today and has charted a course for our future. I would echo Connie's plug that March 29th, there's a gala that's happening. I plan to be there. I know there will be other law enforcement that will be there. There will be people from the courts, people from the community. It's a good time, and B, it's an extremely worthy cause. So I know everybody reminds me that I tend to take a long time when I'm talking, but I think this is all information that was worth sharing. So thank you, everybody.
You mind if I dovetail? I want to
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
conversation
please.
too about
Yeah,
Connie and my visit to the legislature last winter.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Because I'll say, even if I wasn't a law enforcement person, one of the things that really bothers me is how much effort Connie has to put into fundraising
Yeah.
rather than thinking about how to help victims. And it's a travesty that sucks up so much of her energy, but money's the fuel that keeps the operation going to provide the service. And we went to the legislature last fall, and it was wildly disappointing. And I'm not going to put a partisan label on it, other than I know anybody listening who knows we have some newly elected officials that are working in the State House. Is that no? I don't think it would be good if Victim Services was a state agency, at least the way that the Alex House provides the service. But I do think the state could share some resources to make it so that whether it's Alex House or some other domestic violence shelter in the state of Minnesota doesn't have to put so much work into fundraising, or doesn't have so much stress and consternation when the economy doesn't do so well, and suddenly the first thing that dries up is city's support of Alex House's work, or the number of people that attend the gala,
Foundations, yeah.
or foundation support and so on. So I hope if anybody has a connection to a new state legislature, it really isn't a partisan issue. And frankly, the thing that was disappointing, I think, most to me when we watched the debate happen on the legislative floor is that they didn't even understand what they were talking about.
Right.
And then they wouldn't ask questions to find out or to gain an understanding of what it was they were talking about. And without getting too lost in the weeds for the sake of taking time, but we wound up talking about like direct financial support to crime victims was one avenue of the conversation when
Kind of
Connie
a
was there.
Voucher, like a voucher, like here,
Yeah.
give the victim.
Yeah, the victim-
some money, and then they can go find a counselor.
Yeah,
Like
the
they-
victim
yeah.
got her nose broken, so here's a $200 check. It was nonsense, and it wasn't. I know they were well intentioned, but it's how it was a good example how the conversation got lost in the weeds, and just the way it is set up. The committee process and so on, it isn't really designed to share information in a way that was sensible. At least that was my experience. The better way to go about this is to have one-on-one conversations with legislators, especially new ones, and tell them this is what you need to make happen. And if you make it your legislative priority to any individual legislator in Anoka County, again, regardless of party, the way things get done is by those folks having other conversations and getting more stakeholders, and next thing you know, they'll have a legislative win, which will financially support Alex House, which then supports victims, which then reduces violence in the future. We have an opportunity.
And I felt like when I approached you and other law enforcement people I'd met in the past, that you have a stake in the game. We saw the whole thing in Burnsville. It was just really upsetting to all of us. I have a relative who's a chaplain in California with law enforcement, and he was on a vacation once and flew home because domestic violence situations are some of the most terrifying for your officers to enter, not knowing what the volatile situation could be. So I knew right away, your group of people would partner with people who wanted to see this funded, and I think that helped legislators also recognize this is about a community. This isn't about like one person being battered in a home by one person. This affects the neighbors, it affects the kids, it affects the schools, it affects, those called to serve. You don't know what's going to happen, and if some of these people got help before it escalated, we'd have fewer lives lost.
But the work that Alex House or Connie Moore is on the leading edge of right now is that, we're great at holding people accountable. So a person assaults an intimate partner, they go to jail, and then they're held accountable for that.
And we wanted to hear that from you tonight, and you both
Yeah.
affirming that was
That is
very
true.
reassuring to all of us watching. We have pretty much a full house here tonight, but we have a lot of people who watch this and the replays, and it's assuring because sometimes the rumors out there is that doesn't happen.
Well,
So,
it's
thank
not,
you.
it's not
Thank you.
without its challenges. I mean, but our goal every time is to address the situation in a way in which we break a cycle so that we're sending a message that this can never happen again. I wouldn't say that we're successful every time on it. I mean, one of the challenges we face is that when you have huge caseloads and you have a full jail and you have backlogs of cases that go back into the COVID time, it takes a long time for those cases to work through the system. And frankly,
And people on bail because they have that right.
People
They
on
have that
bail,
right,
but
yeah.
frankly, the longer a case goes on, in domestic violence cases in particular, the harder it is to get an outcome or to get people to buy into the criminal justice system and come in and testify, because candidly, they want to move on with their families, their lives, and the issue. And so we do run into the challenge of recanting victims that are recanting, I think, and I think there's evidence of this, because they just don't want to deal with the process anymore. Sometimes they're recanting because they've been tampered with. They've been under a lot of pressure. And that's a very human and real problem we have to deal with. Sometimes there's an incentive to put pressure on a victim by an offender because the collateral consequences, the ripple effect of the conviction is going to be devastating or difficult for a family. And those are the difficult decisions that prosecutors have to take into consideration as they process their cases. I would say that the philosophy is hold people accountable and try to send the message through the way you're administering the case that this has got to stop now and this can never happen again. Now, there are those cases where it's pretty clear to us that we need to put somebody away just to keep the community safe. And we'll put as much resources as we possibly can into that effort, but we also have to deal with the court system. And if we end up trying the cases before a jury, we have to prove them by the highest legal standard that there is, beyond a reasonable doubt. So the effort is there, the intentions are there, but it's still a challenge even for us to get those outcomes sometimes on these cases. They're hard.
It helps us understand, there's a lot going on, because you talked about the challenges to a family. Yeah. So during this time of collecting the evidence and talking to the victim and building a case, if suddenly the person packs up and moves, but he supports the family, usually he, sometimes she, then the harm to that individual is not ongoing. It's a little bit, less stressful for the community, but they've still committed the crime, so you keep pursuing it. But I see where you might have things that weigh into it. The children need food, and maybe the mother is in the hospital, or maybe she died. I don't know. I mean, some of these cases are horrendous.
Right.
Let me add, I'll just add, it's a quick comment, is that holding people accountable, though, is only part of the equation. The other part is that how do you stop this person from being violent in the future? So, here Alex House puts a lot of effort into helping we'll attach a gender to it, because let's just be honest, that's what the bulk is, women who get assaulted by men. Is that a lot of effort is to put on then maybe separating the female victim from the male perpetrator. The reality is even if they separate, the male perpetrator goes on with life and presumably will enter into a new romantic relationship with somebody with a propensity for violence. And it's not like they're going to have it tattooed on their forehead or on their resume. They don't put it in their Tinder profile, by the way, I'm violent. So the piece that we're really wanting to work on is how do you stop these people from reacting with violence when they're under stress in an intimate relationship? And actually I talked about this at the, this fall was, like, as a parent, I have a 22 and a 20-year-old boy, or male and female. And like, even teaching them how to end a relationship well feels like a parental responsibility to me.
Because you've seen.
I'm just saying, we talk about find love and find your partner and all that stuff, and then, just being honest, you know what, kids, your relationships are going to go sideways. Figure out how to break up and get over it. Move on.
That was actually a topic I thought would be really relevant for us to understand, because that was something that was eye-opening to me when I sat here as an elected official, is hearing from the law enforcement people working in the high schools and from the principal. This stuff's going on in the high schools.
Yeah, that's why I brought up the juvenile delinquency thing, because we're prosecuting domestic violence cases against juveniles.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, and that's really kind of frightening and upsetting, because people think when they send their kids to school they're going to be fine, but then they get in relationships or they get in situations, and it's like, where does this end? It's a cultural thing, is what Connie talked to us about, and it's something that all of us as adults need to make a difference where we can. But is locking everybody up going to work? Not really. You can't always catch people.
No, it's not going to work, to be honest. I worry about a social media generation that gets a little me-oriented, the narcissism that I'm sure everybody in the audience talks about. Narcissistic, this person or that person seems to be all about themselves, which is a big chunk of the origin of domestic violence, is that if I can't have you with me, I'm going to control you, and I'm going to punish you for not wanting to be with me because I'm entitled to own you, basically, is a mindset. And how do you get out of that trap? But that's where the big thinking needs to
Okay.
be. That's the work that needs to be done now and moving forward. I mean, we can arrest people, we can get them in jail, we can get, all
But
sorts of assessments. They're
that doesn't
separated
stop.
for a period of time. And then you're like, but how do you keep it from the magnet forces coming back together? Because love is a tricky thing, and you can't explain people's emotions. Like you drive down the road and somebody cuts you off and you shake your fist at them and you're angry and your blood's boiling and you come to the stoplight and then you see it's a good friend of yours, you'd be like, hey. But emotions are hard to manage, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the most emotional, the domestic relationship is the most emotional time. And if somebody's willing to introduce violence into it, how do you turn that off? It's a tough thing.
The anger management stuff is, I don't know if it works.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably part of some of the stuff that you suggest to people, but
There are two components of
to
this.
go back to kindergarten and people
Yeah.
learning to
Yeah.
get along.
Yeah, I do
kids.
think that I have two girls too. We look at this as parents, and I think that I would like to see more conversation at earlier ages when people aren't involved in the criminal justice system about how to have healthy interpersonal relationships, domestic and otherwise. The issues that we deal with in the Anoka County Attorney's Office that go, you can imagine that somebody who witnesses domestic violence as a child is also engaged in bullying, is also engaged in other assaultive behavior. There's also all sorts of things that are manifesting itself before they even get to us. And so I wanna see if we can start having those conversations earlier rather than when people are looking at a judge.
So maybe we go back to like that task force that you had back in 1976 to 78, and we need some people coming from some of these groups, the churches, the places dealing with stuff, and just have some of these discussions and probably educators, because
Yeah.
this cycle isn't, Connie told us it's getting worse.
Yeah.
And
Right.
working in the schools, she's
Well-
telling us from the audience.
What I'd like to be able to do is have the resources to work with we're mostly in high schools, because that's what
Yeah.
So there's an interest, Connie is saying, by Alexander House to work in high schools, and I know you've done some,
Yep.
and you get asked, but that's probably part of the funding shortfall issue, where if they could have some charitable pull tab money or some gaming or donations or bigger fundraisers, there would be more resources to kind of get some of this at the age when these relationships are forming and breaking up and people are first experiencing those emotions that might lead to more violence than we want to see. Well, we have a few audience questions, and we'll see what Leslie's gathered from our audience.
The first question, kind of along the lines of the discussion, was does Anoka County provide support or resources for working with perpetrators to educate them and change behaviors?
I'll maybe defer to the county attorney here on this, but that's sort of after, obviously our role is we handcuff people and bring them to jail, and then they go through the court process. And frankly, from the cops, then they just walk away from.
We should have
that
just
and
had
onto the
Connie
next.
come up here. If you want to come and sit at a microphone
Yeah.
and help, that
Might
would
be
be
better.
fine. Or
You want to come up, Connie?
Yeah.
Come on up.
Because you're off camera and they can't hear you, so we need,
Get up here,
almost
Connie.
any microphone works, but if you just sit over by Brad.
Well, it's
Brad to the
court-
right, Brad to their left. Yeah.
Like court-ordered assessments are
Kind of like
part
there
of
used to
it.
be
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
Daves.
So I'll just touch on that briefly. There are a couple of components or points where that can come into the criminal justice system, but this is one of those areas where I think there's an opportunity here that is not where traditionally the criminal justice system has been. Typically, the system waits for there to be an outcome before conditions are imposed. So, for example, whether it's anger management or some other kinds of therapy, that can be part of a recommended probationary sentence, right? I want you to complete domestic violence programming, they refer to it as, or anger management and things like that. I would say that and this is a philosophy thing, I would love to see, and some defense attorneys recommend this to their clients, I would love to see the system making recommendations to those offenders right away, right as a part of their conditional release to engage in it. It'll have to be then as a voluntary program. But if they complete the voluntary program, my view is an early acceptance of responsibility says something about the future potential, generally, not always, but about the future potential for that person to rehabilitate. And so if they accept responsibility and they engage in that kind of activity while the case is going on, so they're taking it seriously and they're addressing it, and they're going to support groups and things like that, I think prosecutors ought to consider that in how they sentence their cases then, if they're successful and serious. Go ahead.
Is this on? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I know with the lethality assessment program that was started through the county attorney's office, one of the things that came out of that is called the IDAP program, the Intensive Domestic Abuse Program, and that's through corrections. And so what you're talking about, if there's a high-risk case, the offender does have the opportunity to voluntarily get help, whether that's, maybe there's chemical dependency issues or other things. But they do have that opportunity to do that. That isn't in all cases, so,
Right.
and obviously there's resource issues, but there are programs in Anoka County that provide programming for offenders. I can tell you that most often, unless they're court ordered, it doesn't happen too much, but we were hoping through that lethality assessment to at least get some of that during. So there's that pre-trial before there's already a monitoring going on with corrections. And so that lethality assessment was a big deal in Anoka County, and it brought all law enforcement, prosecution, county attorney, and it really came out of the county attorney's office in a grant that was applied for, a federal grant, and has continued, and I believe it's made a huge difference, really. We had the highest domestic homicide rate in the state of Minnesota in Anoka County. I called your dad.
I remember.
And there was this grant opportunity, and so we went for it, and we had and this was the highest rate of homicide in the state of Minnesota. So we're not the highest populated, but it was all, we still had, I think that year, 7 homicides.
I believe Anoka County was the first that brought the lethality assessment to Minnesota.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then Hennepin was right there with it.
Yeah. So that's made a big difference, and that's what I think partnerships and collaborating is able to accomplish, where you're working together to figure out, okay, what's your role? What can you do? Whether it's law enforcement, whether it's a nonprofit organization or a county office. I mean, we work together, so.
So we just have a few minutes left because we like to try and keep this concise. Do you have another question or two that we could take?
Yeah, we do have a few questions on training for officers. If Sheriff Wise, you talked a little bit how the response has changed over the years. Maybe if you could share a little bit about what type of training the officers receive for responding to domestic violence and how they training to ensure empathy in those situations.
Yeah, the culture of law enforcement's changed a lot from the time when I started to what it is now. And yes, being able to be, well, frankly, even when it comes to hiring, probably the most important skill for a law enforcement officer to have is empathy. And we spend a lot of time training on that, whether it's related to domestic violence or responding to a traffic crash or anything like that. You're talking about dealing with people who are in their life's worst situations, and the thing they need most is a sense of empathy. I would, again, from a law enforcement perspective, though, it's not rocket science, because we even take the decision-making away from the cops themselves. When they show up at a scene and a victim reports violence, the policy says the officer shall arrest. So it's not like they're doing deep thinking and all this. What they're doing and what they get good at is reading the scene and understanding the emotions behind the incident. That basically is where experience comes in. And of course, training is the substitute for experience, because we want brand new officers and deputies to know what they're doing as soon as they hit the road. Unlike when I started, it was a lot of learn as you go type stuff. We just don't have the time to wait for that to happen anymore. But I would say that's a strength of where we're at right now, is that they do take it, and it's basically what we call strategic patience. And it's showing up and taking time, once the scene is calm, is taking time to assess what's really going on and invest energy in to figure out what's really going on. Because sometimes for reasons that are difficult, especially for young officers and deputies to understand, sometimes a victim may not be as forthcoming as you might think. I mean, you and I would sit and think, all right, a woman is punched in the face by her partner, why wouldn't she tell me that? And when I take him to jail, why wouldn't she leave while he's locked up and just disappear? That completely discounts the emotions of it all, and we invest a lot of energy in understanding the emotions that are happening behind the scene, because, one violent incident doesn't necessarily shut the switch of love off for a victim. So
I will say, as a prosecutor who's gone on a lot of ride-alongs with law enforcement, and I've been there to kind of watch how law enforcement engages in domestic violence incidents, the skills of de-escalating that when they come into that scene, and then ultimately, which I continue to be amazed at, coaxing a person to get into the back of a squad car after they were all amped up is quite impressive. And we mentioned Officer Plotz, and I just want to call him out because the first ride-along I had in the city of Coon Rapids, I didn't know him, and I got paired with him. And a call came out while we were in roll call, and they said, Plotz, grab your rider and go and have him fill out this liability waiver while you're en route. And we ended up at a domestic violence incident, and it was very charged when he had to go into it, and it left with a peaceable resolution and a guy who cooperated and got with the program and went for a ride. So It's amazing the work that they do.
Do you have another one that you thought
Well,
was
we do
important?
have a number of questions, but maybe time for one
Maybe
more.
we'll do, all right, let's do one more and we'll let
Okay.
Leslie edit.
The next question is, how do you ensure, what does Anoka County do to ensure that kids are supported?
Oh, that's a really good question. A couple of things. The kids are a factor in how we deal with the domestic violence-related incidents that happen. And we always know through either the police reports or the lethality assessment that there are children involved. But sometimes, I'm going to characterize it like this, when children are present or at risk in a domestic violence incident, that mandates a call out to Anoka County Social Services, and a child protection case also dovetails with the criminal case. So even though the criminal case may be won or lost, there may be an open child protection case where we are then dealing at the county level with the services that are necessary, and that can even include having stay-away orders and things like that while we stabilize the situation. And then the whole goal in a child protection case is different than in a criminal case. In a criminal case, the goal is to do justice and to hold people accountable from our standpoint. In a child protection case, it's called a CHIPS case, child in need of protection or services. The goal is to stabilize things so there can be family reunification. Sometimes that family reunification might mean separation of the parents, but it also means that there's a pathway for the children to get what they need, for the mother to get what she needs, and for the father, candidly, to get what he needs, so that that family can hopefully be safe again.
There's also the Parent Support Outreach Program.
Yeah.
that if there's a child protection report that doesn't rise to opening an actual case, and if it's domestic related, we get pulled into that. The family is, or the victim is usually the mom, but they have the opportunity to work with us at Alexandra House through that program, and so there's some funding available, so it kind of can get in there and try to get some help for that, the kids and the family at that point. So we work with the county on that as well. So there's that piece too. So
State government says it wants to be hard on crime. If it can't give money, then are they soft on crime?
It's doing surgery without curing the disease. So I do the surgery part, we do the surgery part mostly, but we're not curing that disease.
It's an interesting dynamic dealing with the state government and the state of Minnesota on things, because I think there's, at least from my perspective, you know, in my seat, when I see the legislature act on something, they'll pass a new law or they'll pass a new budget or whatever, and there'll be the little allocations of that. And then there'll be some kind of a signing ceremony. There'll be a little bit of a celebration that they've done something on it. But candidly, nothing is done yet, because it comes out to law enforcement and to us to carry out those laws and to see them through whatever system we have. So one of the things that I really, really wish, and if there are any state legislators that are watching this, we have some good ones here in Anoka County that do this, but especially the newer ones, I think there's a little bit of a shyness to reach out to the stakeholders, you know, in the executive branch of government that have to carry these laws out and to actually implement them, to have the conversation while the law is being created, rather than passing it and then saying, can you do something with that?
Go ahead.
Can you remove the weapons or firearms from the home and or the person?
The answer is yes, in many circumstances. And there is a new tool that was created here in Minnesota called an extreme risk protection order, where the law enforcement or the city or county attorney can be a petitioner to ask the court to remove firearms and other weapons, but mostly firearms, from a particular situation. And we have a designated attorney in our office who handles that. It doesn't happen in every case, though. There are certain criteria that have to be met for that.
But I'll say it does happen. We are doing it, and it's non-controversial, despite the fact that 2 years ago, the politics was, oh my God, the sky would fall if we did this. The sky isn't falling. It literally, I can't even think of one that was controversial. It made sense to everybody when a firearm was removed from a house. Everyone goes,
Yeah,
that's
and-
the right time to do it.
Yeah, and you know, even when a city does it, the sheriff and the county attorney's office get notified that has happened. And a lot of times what happens is it's becoming kind of routine, where they kind of take possession of those things, and then they stay with that agency until there's been a disposition of the case. And sometimes they get put with a registered entity that can hold on to those firearms.
So you're talking like the police chiefs of the cities? Okay.
Yep.
Is stalking or other kinds of creepy behavior short of physical contact viewed as domestic violence?
When it's a domestic partner or an intimate partner, 100%. 100%.
And what types of crimes are seen as misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor offenses and handled at the city level in Anoka County?
Okay, I'll just kind of summarize this, and Brad, feel free to kind of pop in. Usually the first domestic assault or the first violation of harassment restraining order, or maybe even under certain circumstances an order for protection, is a misdemeanor. Second one would be a gross misdemeanor. If you get to the point of you have 2 or more within 10 years, that's then a felony. Like I said earlier when I was talking, a domestic assault strangulation is a felony right from the get-go. A disorderly conduct is not regarded as a domestic violence-related offense. And one of the kind of frustrations that I have, I'm sure Connie may have a view on this too, is that sometimes to work cases through the system, we see situations where, and I say this as a felony prosecutor and no judgment on our city attorneys, but who have high caseloads too, but sometimes a domestic assault will get resolved as a disorderly conduct, and so then I can't count it as one of the 2 or more within 10 years. And sometimes we'll see multiple domestic assaults being resolved as disorderly conducts, and we never get them up to the felony level. And so that's an ongoing conversation. We have good city attorneys here. It's an ongoing conversation we have, but that's just the reality of the situation.
And then just one other sentence is that it starts with the lowest level would be fear of immediate bodily harm. So if a victim reports, I thought I was on the verge of being punched or whatever, fear of immediate bodily harm. And then bodily harm is any pain or injury. So again, like bruising or something along those lines are traditionally where you'd be at the misdemeanor end of things.
Right.
And then if somebody is physically suffering more harm, that's where we're talking about, could be a felony or multiple offenses that are of the multiple bruising incidents could then lead to felonies too.
So a couple questions too, and I'll kind of combine these. It is about how prevalent compared to other counties domestic violence is in Anoka County, and then also the prosecution and conviction rate for domestic abuse in the county.
I don't see, and I've never seen any statistics that really suggest that Anoka County is any different than the surrounding suburban counties. So I would compare us to Washington County, Dakota County, and I've never seen a statistic that says that we're that much different. Maybe you have other information.
No, I mean, and as we talked earlier, you spoke to is, it's universal.
Right.
So I think there might be areas where there might be more happening than in other areas, but yeah, it can happen in any community. And I think a lot of people think that it's only those with less resources that are suffering from domestic abuse, and that's not the case. I've worked in this field for a long time and was an advocate, legal advocate, a shelter advocate. And I worked in Hennepin County for a while, and in an area where there was quite well-to-do families. And actually, I will say to this day that I think someone who comes from a family where there's more resources sometimes is more trapped, actually, because they have more to lose and there's more power in that relationship that can control pretty much everything. But domestic violence can happen in any family.
Yep, I would echo that. And then the question on conviction rates, the vast majority of the cases we charge result in a plea. So what that means is you're getting a conviction. Whether it's to the offense charge or not, I mean, we really try hard, and I do not like to plea negotiate down to things that are not reflective of the crime that occurred. So if it's a domestic violence related incident, I want to plea to domestic violence related incident rather than to, for example, a disorderly conduct. Candidly, if you're getting down into the point of wanting to plead out a felony domestic violence related incident for a disorderly conduct, we should be having a conversation about diversion, and just getting, and then just not even getting a conviction, but trying to address the issues that brought them into contact with the criminal justice system. I would say that and I talked about this a little bit earlier, there is a uniqueness with respect to domestic violence-related offenses in that the longer they go on, sometimes the harder it is for us to get a conviction because witnesses don't want to cooperate anymore. People have moved on. And sometimes those people that we need to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt are saying that they don't want to cooperate anymore. And we do occasionally have to dismiss cases where we just know we can't prove them because people have moved on. And that is as much a frustration for prosecutors and law enforcement as it is for the community.
And then the last question is there a significant impact with the use of social workers in domestic abuse situations?
I'm going to let you talk a little bit about this too, but I mean, one of the things that we realized as a county attorney's office, is that law enforcement isn't always or necessarily always the best tool to help people through an incident when it has happened. And so the more we can get people immediate, and Alexander House has been just amazing in this in our community, but the more we can get people immediately to services, the better the outcomes are. And that even includes outcomes where the offender is ultimately going to be moving back into that home. So the more we can address those things up front, and that has caused some of our law enforcement agencies in Anoka County to do something quite unique, and I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, when I was in Coon Rapids, we started a social worker, an embedded social worker program, and we're set to start one at the sheriff's office January 1st here. Thanks. The second piece of that then is also starting one at the jail, and again, the system we're looking at is sort of a holistic countywide system. So the social workers that are assigned to different geographic areas, whether Blaine has one, Columbia Heights has one, Coon Rapids has one, the sheriff's office will have one. Is specifically for support, because I want cops to stay in their lane. They're good at responding to a call, de-escalating, putting people in handcuffs, taking them to jail. We run into trouble when we ask the cops to be a social worker or figure out a family problem because they're not good at it. So I want them to stay in their lane. So I want them to excel at staying in their lane, then simultaneously have somebody who comes in and looks for that longer term solution. And I would expect that these city/county social workers will work very closely with Alexander House moving forward about, for this particular family, what is the need, where's our opportunity for making a long-term difference, whether it's kids or whatever it is that's in the mix. Because that's something that it's been a gaping hole, and it's something we can do better.
I want to make sure that something that Sheriff Wise said, though, registers with the audience here, because when he came to us in Coon Rapids and said, I'd like to work with Blaine and add a social worker to work with our department, the council was behind him 100%, and that all made sense to all of us because you're dealing with victims and you're dealing with children and you're trying to figure out how to get people to services and stuff like that. But the evolution is such that he's now talking about having a social worker in connection with a jail. Mm-hmm. Now, I want, hear me on this. That's not to help the victim. The social worker at the jail actually is there to help the offender get to the services that they need, find a safe place for them to be at so that we don't return them back into an unhealthy situation without anybody to call and without any services. And so it's addressing the problem at both ends, hoping to have better outcomes in the long run. And I think we will.
And 10 seconds related to that. And so somebody who's arrested on a domestic violence offense, when they're in jail, they'll meet with the vision is they'll meet with the social worker before they're released. And that social worker would be able to say, man, this guy's still angry. And we need to do something, and then connect with the social worker who's assigned to the whatever geography they live in, and all right, we got a real hothead who's getting released. That information needs to make its way back to the victim. That kind of it's more of a holistic approach. Now, I haven't seen it done before, and I'm kind of interested to see how that works out. But Alex House still plays a very key role, but frankly, we'd serve them better if they get to stay in their lane too. as opposed to trying to, all right, you arrest them and then we'll do everything else. That's hard. That's hard.
Well, I want to thank everyone. I think if people, after the program concludes, there could be a few question and answers perhaps at that time, but I want to be respectful of those with the timeline, and our guests have been very generous with their time this evening. So I want to thank everybody for helping educate us more about the complex topic of domestic abuse in Anoka County, the efforts being made, the work being done by the Sheriff's Office and the County Attorney's Office, as well as the support provided by Alexandra House. If you want to learn more, each of these people has websites and contact information you can easily find by doing a search. So thank you for learning more about domestic abuse in Anoka County with the League of Women Voters. Have a nice evening.